You talked about your 3 long form projects and those stories. Tell us a bit about how they pertain to your belief in yourself, the world, and stories that you want to tell. Give us a few more details about those projects and specifically the story, if you can and if you want to, the stories that you want to tell in those narratives.
Yeah, so a good example is a story I'm working on now for about 5 years in Chile, which is a story about the big narrative of people and land having a shared history, people and land having a shared story in a place very, very south in Patagonia, in Chilean Patagonia, where we, together with a team of filmmakers, are working on like a multimedia project that will be a feature film as well as an exhibition and a book
Cool.
on a culture that I wouldn't say it's Gaucho culture, but it's kind of Gaucho related, so cowboy related. We're following a group of about 14 individual, in Spanish it's called puesteros, which is like a lone gauchos, lone cowboys that live on big estancias owned by wealthy families to look after the cattle and the farm.
Long cowboys.
No, it's like cowboys.
Yeah.
Let's call them cowboys.
Okay.
They're called gauchos in Spanish, but gauchos
Gauchos.
are existing all the way from Central America down to South America and almost every country. So it's essentially Spanish for cowboy. But the guys we are filming and following for the past couple of years are individual characters that live a kind of like an almost completely isolated life in looking after the farms of wealthy ranchers, just themselves. None of them has a family. None of them has kids. They all traveled down a couple of decades ago. All the 14 characters are in between the age of 50 and 85. So they like kind of lonely man living in a very remotely abandoned farms. A story, a completely forgotten culture, a completely forgotten story about almost a forgotten land. And the story came on my path when I was on a long road trip in 2018 into 2019 with a camper van crossing the entire length of Patagonia, not necessarily looking for these gauchos, but just happened to bump into a few of them. I started reading about them, doing research, and while doing that research, I bumped into an Australian Chilean film director from Sydney who was working on a short film about the same culture. So I just sent him an email like, I kind of like what you're doing. I saw the 9-minute film, which I highly recommend people to watch. It's called Campesinos on Vimeo. And we kind of got into touch and speaking a lot and long calls between Amsterdam, where I live, and Sydney after returning from Patagonia about our shared passion for seeing if we could tell the story of those men, because it's never been told before. And it was really happening on that intersection where I deeply believe in we should provide more of a hopeful coexistence narrative where we can show people that the harmony and the balance of those two elements, people and land, with a different approach can give so much hope to people as well. So that's how the story started. But then when digging deeper into the matter, we found the story had, besides that relationship between people and land, way more dynamics about mental health, about masculinity, about isolation, like lots of social elements to the story. And it encouraged both of us to really wanting to build something bigger than just that initial idea. But then COVID came, so Australia went into a full lockdown. The boys, like the film director was working with a cinematographer. They couldn't leave the country for 2 years. So we kept working on the script. And then we were literally on the first flight out when the world opened up again, and did 3 consecutive years of 6 weeks of production each year in the region, in which we did long interviews with all those characters in their homes. We followed their daily lives for 6 weeks a year, and just had the last production leg last year. So we're rounding up the field work now, moving into the editing phase of building the framework for the film. The film will be about like a 90-minute, 100-minute like documentary style film. And I shot the entire story for the book and hopefully an exhibition in the future. We have a bit of a funding team which is backing us up now, applying for international grants and funds to see if we can get money to get the production started. So this is a good example, I think, of a story that started as kind of a passion project, but over time, by going back and investing into the relationships we were having with these men as the foundation of friendship. And I think that strong foundation of friendship later in the production proved itself extremely valuable in telling a story that is intimate and emotional, and like we're really trying to allow those men to tell their story that has never been told before.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, excuse my cynicism, my immediate thought was, how are you funding all? I mean, it's just so big, and I know what goes into all this, and then you add in a film as well, and
so it's
probably the biggest hurdle.
It's a big hurdle, and it's so far self-funded. I mean, it's a small team. It's just me, myself. It's me, Matthias, the director, and Miller, the cinematographer. So it's a team of 3 on ground, which is overseeable. Matthias is having Chilean roots. His grandparents are from the region, so he speaks all the local dialects. He has the local network. So we don't really work with fixers or translators. It's just a very small production crew, which works very well because we always have one film camera and one photographer working at the same time. They're very small spaces because we almost all happens in the small homes of these guys. It's very intimate, right? So it's not a big production budget. We travel very, very on very strict budgets. But now we're moving into the production of the film as well as the book. Suddenly there is more cost coming to the table, right?
Books are expensive, let alone films.
Yeah, and I mean the edit is it's very pricey to hire people to make the footage go into a first cut for a final film. That whole process of drilling the footage, of building the framework, building the story arc, not even talking about producing the final piece with sound design and composing music and grading and then the distribution network of the film. And it's a lot, but we're so far all doing it ourselves.
Amazing. I love big projects like this because as a photographer, I find it, people always talk about, you need to tell a story in your image. Like I feel like I think that's overdone and people talk about that too much. You can't tell a story in one image. You can tell aspects of a story and a bit of context. But when you throw in, 5 years of going back and forth and really knowing these people and a really true, authentic story that started as a concept, and okay, we can tell this overarching story of these cowboys and their lost relationship with the land and nature. But when you actually dig deep and you actually get to the nitty-gritty of it, the individual stories and their struggles and whatever they're going through really start to take hold, right? And that's just really how you tell a story.
See, and so in my case, this happens far away from home, but so this is one thing I'm always telling people in mentorships and masterclasses: you don't need to travel far and wide to be able to find these stories. See, it happened to us that during this road trip, we bumped into this story that sparked my interest. But the one thing that people should understand who are starting this job is that these stories happen everywhere. It just depends on how you look for them. And they happen everywhere you live, in your street, perhaps even in your home. Try to make it as intimate as possible and see if you can invest longer windows of time into building a story close to home, because it's cheap to stay close to home. It allows you to keep going back. And what I found during the first couple of years of working on these long form projects is you find so much meaning in building relationships first, and then only the last step of the process is photographing or documenting it. And I'm not saying that you should become best friends with everybody you photograph, but if the foundational quality of your story is mutual interest, respect, human dignity, just core values that I think are important being human, you will get high return on the quality of the eventual story.